We're go for liftoff. Luke.
Welcome back to Practical Guitar Amplifier Repair.
Awesome.
So there's a tube crisis situation going on, kind of
Mhm.
like in the beginning of the pandemic where nobody could find toilet paper. Same things happen with tubes. So with the war in Russia, one of our major tube manufacturers is in Russia, and
Oh, Luke, I think I just muted you. Hold on.
how's
If
that?
you, that's good.
So there's three factories that produce tubes. There's one in Russia, there's one in Slovak, and there's one in China. The one in China was it burnt down. Then they were going to move factories. They're still producing tube, but they're not producing nearly as many as they were. They plan on ramping up production and increasing the factory output, but right now and for the past couple of years, it's been significantly decreased. The one in Slovak, which is where we get like our JJs. JJs are like a major JJ's is like the industry standard. Like everybody uses JJ's. The other big tube reseller is Electro Harmonics, and they come from Russia. Um, so with the tube sank or the restrictions on imports and exports from Russia, it basically took out like 50% of our supply. So that doesn't mean all these retailers don't have the tubes. It means they basically like shut down so they could supply the people that actually need the tubes. So they could supply Marshall and Fender and all these other different manufacturers the tubes. So they're still around and we can still get them. Um, but it sent everyone in a panic. And so everyone says, oh no, I'm not going to be able to get tubes anymore. So I better go buy 3 sets of tubes for my Marshall, or I better go buy 3 sets of tubes for my Princeton. So everybody bought them up like literally overnight. Tube prices have literally doubled. And that's even if you can find them. You can't really even find any tubes, at least the most common stuff. You can still find the new old stock stuff, but new old stock stuff is ridiculously expensive. So for example, a JJ, a 12AX7 is a JJ 12AX7 used to be about $12, $13. They overnight they jumped up to $25. And that's even if you can get them. So hopefully everything calms down and JJ will supply most people. They'll find a workaround to supply with the Russian tubes. Big manufacturer, big. So this is the way. So this is the way all the different tube brands work. A brand like our Electro Harmonics buys tubes from Russia, from the Russian factory. Then they test them and do certain tests, and then they brand them as Electro Harmonics and they stick their own brand on them. Tube Amp Doctor is another one. So Tube Amp Doctor uses mostly Russian tubes. I do think they use some Chinese tubes too. They buy them from the same factory as Electro Harmonics buys them from, and then they rebrand them Tube Amp Doctor. So why do people think like, why do people pay an extra amount of money for a Tube Amp Doctor tube compared to Electro Harmonics? Because Tube Amp Doctor 12AX7 is like $25 before the tube crisis. And an Electro Harmonics 12AX7 is like $14. So why pay the extra? Because Tube Amp Doctor does more testing than Electro Harmonics. So that means there's more waste. So Tube Amp Doctor gets all these tubes in, they test them, say they get 1,000 12AX7s, they test them, and they might throw out 200 tubes because they didn't meet their standards. Where our Electro Harmonics might keep 900. And then the real budget brand tube, the real budget brands, they might not throw out any. So you may get a bad tube like straight out of the box. That's one thing that we always most techs always say is there's no guarantee on tubes. You can plug them into your amp and then they last an hour or they could last 50 years. It's really hard to say. does that make sense about the different manufacturers? Did I open any confusion there?
So basically, we got a kind of a toilet paper situation with tubes now.
Yeah, exactly. So the only difference between this situation and the toilet paper situation is that there wasn't necessarily a decrease in supply with the toilet paper. At least not the we literally aren't able to get these Russian tubes right now.
Mm.
And it sounds like there's gonna be a backdoor way that they're gonna get them. So it sounds like they're probably gonna send these tubes to the China factory because Russia and China can do commerce right now. The Russian factory will send these tubes to China, and then China will rebrand them Chinese tubes and then send them out to all the different people. And that'll be our way of getting them. We'll get them third party and kind of backdoor it. So we'll see. We'll see how things pan out. This leads me to my next point. All these people buying all these tubes. Tubes can last you, like I said, they can last a few hours or they can last years, usually somewhere in between. So we don't. This is a little bit controversial because I know there are techs that when you bring in an amp and it hasn't been serviced for a very long time, say it hasn't been serviced in 10 years, they say, well, the first thing we need to do is replace all your tubes. That's not right. Tubes might be worn out, but they also might be perfectly fine. So just replacing tubes as a matter of them being old is kind of silly. It's similar to strings as far as sometimes people replace them every show, and sometimes people leave them on there because they like the way they sound when they go a little dull. Now, I don't think anybody necessarily likes tubes when they go a little bit dull. I think that's a little bit exaggerating. But the point is, just because somebody says that they replace their tubes every 6 months doesn't mean that that's the right thing to do. So when I get an amp in and it needs service, no matter how old it is, even if it's from the 50s and it's never had its tubes replaced, I will remove all the tubes. I'll do a full service on the amp, clean all the tube sockets, clean all the things, check all the components, measure the resistors, make sure the capacitors are in the right spot, make sure there's no bad solder joints. And then I'll test the tubes on my cheap tube tester. It's not a cheap tube tester, it's just a vintage one. It basically just tells me if it's shorted or not. You can get a better quality tube tester. They're about between like $1,000 and $1,500 for a 9-pin, and then 9-pin tube, which is like your preamp tubes and your EL84s. That's one tube tester, and then you have to buy another one for power tubes or like your octals, and they test them and measure them, and you get a much more clear understanding of how that tube's going to function. But you're talking about $2,500 for tube testers, whereas so I don't have those. So the way that I do it is I just plug the tubes into the amplifier and I listen to how it sounds. I know what amps are supposed to sound like, and then I can also measure like the output on them if I have any question. I can see if they sound noisy by like tapping on them, or you'll be able to hear if the amp doesn't sound right. You can try swapping out these tubes. So that's why it's good to have an extra supply of tubes. So you have a whole bunch of 12AX7s, 12AU7s, T7s, have all the different power tube denominations. So EL84, 6V6, 6L6, EL34, 6550s. And then when you have a question whether a tube is good in an amplifier, you can put a known set of good tubes in there to see if it makes a difference. If it doesn't make a difference, that old tube's good, and there's no indication that it might fail at any point just because it's old. So don't replace your tubes just because they're old, and don't let somebody just replace your tubes because they're old. If they can't figure out if the tubes are functioning correctly in the amp, then you probably should take it to a different tech. It's not that it's not that complicated. And also, and unless these people are charging ridiculous amounts of money for these tubes, there's no money to be made on tubes. They're too expensive to begin with. So people don't typically mark them up too much. I only mark them up about 30%. And that pretty much gets it to the point where if the customer went to buy their own tubes, they'd spend about the same amount of money. I mean, I know that's not necessarily best business practice, but I want people to replace their tubes when they're needed. So I don't want them to bring in an amp and not do the work because they don't want to pay for the tubes. So the tubes can rack up a repair bill really quick. So that's why I try to keep them relatively low. And I think most techs do the same thing.
So are there a bunch of like still decent used tubes sitting somewhere?
Yeah, definitely. There are techs that, like I said, there are techs that just pull tubes out of amps because because they said that they gig every weekend and they haven't replaced their tubes in 5 years. That and I don't know what hopefully they keep them, but if they're honest people, they probably give them back to the customer. The customer probably throws them away. It's really a waste. So
Yeah,
going
I
out.
think I had my panoramic amp serviced by Pat in Brooklyn, and I think my tubes are still taped to the inside of the carcass there.
Yeah, I give all the parts back to people
Mm.
after, no matter what it is. And if it's a part that I want, like maybe I took some old capacitors out of there that like I want for like novelty or something. Usually if I take a component out of an amplifier, it's not good anyway. So I don't typically ask for anything back because I don't really want I don't really want the old crap that I'm taking out. But every once in a while there's the occasion where the person wants some specific reliability and I take out an old component that might still be good and I ask them if I can keep it for a restoration, and usually people do. Um, so there's a difference between um, servicing an amp that is a collector's grade amplifier or servicing an amp that is needs to go on a road for and play 4 or 5 gigs a week. If you have something that's kind of collector's grade, you want to keep everything as original as possible. And that includes tubes. So there's just no room in this world right now for just swapping out tubes all willy-nilly. So don't replace them prematurely. When you have an issue, try to find the issue. Don't just replace the tubes first and then start diagnosing the amp. It's perfectly fine to take a brand new tube and keep putting in each individual slot to see if that makes a difference. That's a troubleshooting technique. It's usually one of the first things that you do when you're having specific complaints. You'll just keep trying to swap out each tube to see if it makes a difference or see if it solves the problem. If it doesn't solve the problem, put the old tubes back in. Same thing with the power tubes. So with power tubes, they can be noisy, and of course they can fail. And an amplifier can still work with a failed power tube. It just might be less wattage. It could also fail and short out and blow a fuse, blow a screen grid resistor, or blow another component, and then then it won't work. But it could be the situation where a tube failed, but the amplifier is still working. If tubes get too out of balance, so when you're checking the bias on them, if one's at 30 milliamps and one's at 50 milliamps, they're out of balance, and those tubes should be changed. And if so it used to be the case in like the 70s and the 80s that it was hard to get a matched set of tubes. So what brands started doing is they started adding a balance circuit to the amps, and that you could match the tubes within the amp, which is great. But if you have a matched set of tubes, if you know that the tubes that went in the amplifier were matched from the beginning, and then they go out of balance, that's a sign that the tube is going bad, and they should be replaced with a matched set. So if the world's kept up with this tube amp crisis and it was hard to get power tubes, then it would be likely the case that we would all start putting balancing circuits back into these amps. So we could get two tubes that were unmatched and then match them within the amp. That hasn't been the case, like I said, since like the 70s or the 80s. But it could be in the future, but probably not. I'm thinking that in a couple of months, all this tube nonsense will kind of calm down. I think the prices will still go up, but I think preamp tubes will go from $25. They'll come back down to, I don't know, who knows, maybe $15, $16. But yeah, I think that kind of covers the tube crisis and kind of puts some information in your ear to when to change tubes. You change tubes when they're bad. You don't change tubes as a matter of routine. In my opinion, I always try to. Sometimes you get these customers that, oh, they haven't been replaced in a long time, I just want to replace them, and I tell them what I just told you guys, and then they basically make the decision whether they want to change them or not. And if I do change them, I always make sure I label the box that says these tubes are still good, so no one throws them away. So I'll write worn on them, or used but still good, stuff like that. Yeah. So if no one has any questions about that, I can switch over. I'll show you how I'll show you how to take tubes in and out of sockets, and I'll show you how to clean and tension the tube sockets, if that's of interest. And if you guys think of any questions while I'm doing this, feel free to shout them out.
Do it.
All right, I'm gonna switch it. You want to pin my phone? Can you hear me? Ah!
I could hear you.
All right, how about now? Ian, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Sorry. All right. All right. So here's a Fender amplifier. This is typical of what you'd see. There's different tube retainers. So here, these are the power tubes. These are 6L6s. They get hot, so be careful. Try to let them cool down. These are what I think most people call them bear trap, but these are tube retainers. You got to just push them down with your two fingers, and then you just gently wiggle the tube back and forth until it comes out. Kind of direct pressure up, and you'll probably get like a little pop. All of a sudden, it'll pop out. So there's a key on the bottom of these tubes. You see that little notch there? On the tube, there's a little notch.
Can you hold it up to the camera just a little bit more? Yes. I see the notch.
You see the notch?
Yeah.
All right. And then you can see in the tube socket, there's a notch, right? I can't zoom in. You see the notch in the tube socket?
Yes.
So that pin you just got to make sure that pin goes in there. Now this is just a plastic. This is just a plastic pin on the bottom of the amp. It's only to make sure that the tube goes in the socket correctly. Sometimes these things pop off, and if you need to, you can see when they pop off. You can see like the outline of that little plastic pin where it used to be, and you can either try to glue this back on with just like a little bit of super glue, but more often than not, I'll just make sure it lines up correctly, and then I'll take a marker and I'll mark where the tube needs to line up to go back in. So you have to be careful, because if you don't get it lined up correctly, then you could short out the tube, or it might just not. More often than not, it just might not function correctly. So that's all that is. If that pin busts off, it's not the end of the world. You could still use that tube. You just have to be careful and make sure the pins go in the right holes. So I'm going to take the rest of these guys out, and there's some myths about well, I won't say they're myths, but there are some. If you read the forums or read what some other people are saying, they tell you, you can't put your fingers on the glass of the tube because they'll get hot and they'll blow because of the oil in your fingers. I'm not saying that that's like false. It's just not practical. Yeah, just like a light bulb, you don't want like oil and stuff on a light bulb. It could make it crack, but as long as it's nothing egregious, you don't have anything to worry about. So let me see if I can get you in a little. I'm gonna have to move you back and forth a little bit. So see, each pin has this little like grabber, that little metal piece that just snugs on the let me see if I can point to it. All right, so inside each little pinhole, there's that little metal guy, and that's what we're actually tensioning. Those little metal things in there. They grab the pin of the tube. They grab the pin of the tube. So what I will do first is, of course, make sure you discharge the amp with the discharge stick that we made a couple of sessions ago. Make sure you discharge it, because what are these called? Pipe cleaners have a little piece of metal in them, and if there's voltage on the plate when you go in these tube sockets, it will shock you. So I take some alcohol and dip my pipe cleaner in some alcohol, and then I go into each pinhole, and clean it out just like that. This amplifier is pretty clean, so I don't expect. Sometimes you pull these out and they're just completely brown with dirt and dust. And that's to say that every single amplifier may not need this. If it's a brand new amplifier, you might not have to do this. Preamp tube sockets usually need this less, and tensioning them can be a little bit of an issue. On old Fenders and things, I definitely will tension them. Amplifiers that have had their maybe have had their tubes placed a bunch of times, or have had some bad techs inside of it. Every time these pins are just metal, so they will get worn out if you are in and out and in and out and in and out. So that was pretty clean. There's not really anything on that. A lot of times I'll clean with one side, I'll snip it off and clean it again, snip it off, clean it again. Usually every time I'm finished with a tube, it will I'll replace the section of pipe cleaner.
So that's the first part. Now the second part's a little controversial, so stay with me. I use deoxit. Use deoxit on the preamp or on the sockets. I spray it in there. I wipe it out, and then I'll blow it out with my air compressor. So it's not great to have a bunch of liquid in the amp, but here's the thing: if you wipe it off, there's no liquid on there, right? So I wipe it off, let that deoxit kind of get down there a little bit. If they're super dirty sockets, I'll do with the pipe cleaner again. And honestly, this amplifier, if I should have picked a better amplifier, but for this service, but for this type of amplifier, I probably wouldn't even use the deoxit. But you can just go back in there with your pipe cleaner a bit and get that deoxit, rub it around a bit, and then take your air compressor, blow it out, wipe it out, and flip the amplifier over. And you'll likely have a bunch of stuff inside, and you want to blow all that stuff out too. And that's how I clean the tube. Oh, so that's how I clean them. Now tension them. I use a dental pick or something like that. Just nice, super tiny and sharp. What also works well is a really tiny flathead screwdriver, even a little bit more tiny than this, like one you would fix your eyeglasses with. That also works really well. I like the pointer because in let me see if I can get you on the actual pin, not every single one. I'm trying to, not every single socket's like this, but you see how there's like a notch on each pin. That's where I get my little probe in there, and then I just gently bend the pin. I don't know what I'm trying to say. The pin. Just gently kind of bend it back on itself. And do that to each one. And again, if the tubes feel really tight, I may forego this, because the more that these get worked in, the looser they can be in the future, So if they don't need it, don't do it. More often than not, they do need them though. Brand new amplifiers, probably not. But anything kind of old. And then I don't typically work the tube in and out. If I have a tube where the pins are dirty, and a lot of times the pins are dirty on 12AX7s more so than the octals, I'll clean them. So I'll clean them with this little thing I got from Stu Mac, a little brush. You can scrub each pin just like that. And then you can also use alcohol, or you can use this stuff. It's called flux remover. I use this all the time. This is like my secret weapon. Every time I use it, people see me using it. It's like, dude, how did you get all that stuff off so easy? Heavy duty flux remover. You can get it on Amazon. It's not very expensive either. And this has lasted me like, shoot, I don't know. I think I've had it for a year, more than a year, probably. Yeah, it's good. So you just spray that on the tubes. I mean, spray it on the pins. And then you take a little brush and just kind of wipe it. And man, the dirt just falls off when you use it. The only thing to pay attention to is, like, if you're using the brush to wipe these pins off, don't use this brush on the faceplate to clean the faceplate, because it'll take off the lettering. So make sure you have different brushes for different things. This stuff does it flashes off really quick, so you don't have to worry about it too much. As far as, you know, blowing it out with the air compressor, it flashes off, so you don't really have to blow this. The only stuff you really have to blow is if you're using deoxit or if you're using another kind of contact cleaner, which, by the way, I'm switching from deoxit to a different type of contact cleaner because this deoxit's starting to really piss me off. It doesn't spray right, and it's super freaking expensive, and I think there's just better stuff out there. Not that there's anything wrong with deoxit, but just the spray bottle alone is enough to piss me off enough to buy a different type of contact cleaner. So to get these back in, you can just kind of shove them back in, you know, make sure the pin is aligned and get the pin back in, and you can kind of just work your way back in. Now, if you're tensioning them and you're having a lot of resistance, it might be the case that you made a pin too tight. So you readjust and double check your pins, and then once they're back in, sometimes you might push it back. That you might push back the bear trap and then push down the tube and then let the bear trap go and then let your tube go, and it should be pretty tight. It'll, you know, tubes do wiggle a little bit in the socket, but it shouldn't be like really loose. So that's it on the octals. Let me show you a preamp tube, which is pretty much the same. So it's just a different pin out. So pull the preamp tube out. Again, you just kind of like wiggle it back and forth. And that was really tight. And the only thing holding this tube in is the pressure from the pins. So if a preamp tube is that tight, you probably don't need to tension the pins. If it just kind of almost falls out, then you'll definitely need to tension it. And amplifiers that have tube retainers, like here's a tube retainer. This is a shield type. So this is actually, you know, it's holding the tube in to make sure it doesn't fall out. It's especially important on combo amps because the tubes hang upside down. So you need something to really hold them in. So see, it will wiggle a little bit, but when I pull it out, that's pretty tight. All right, so cleaning them, same thing. Clean them with a little bit of alcohol, but you can't get a pipe cleaner in here. So what I do is I'll use a toothpick, and I'm gonna get a little alcohol on my toothpick, and then I'll spin one end of the toothpick in, not real hard, just gently, and that gets a little alcohol in there and picks up a little dirt. If they're really dirty, I'll turn the toothpick around. See, can you see that dirt on there?
Yes.
So if they're really dirty, I'll hit them again. Again, this amplifier is pretty clean. So, and you just keep going around till there's no dirt in it left. And I know this is tedious. It's the most tedious part of amplifier service. Then you just got to take your time. You'll get a little faster. You'll recognize the amplifiers that don't need it. So the way that these pins are, show you.
Hey, look, can you explain really quick? Like, is there a sonic problem with the amp that you hear when this needs to be done? Is it like?
Yeah, you'll get if the sockets are dirty, you'll get crackling. You'll just hear like this background, and sometimes you can just hold the tube and it'll go away, or you can wiggle the tube around or it'll get worse.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, if there's dirt between your pins and the socket, you'll get you'll get noisy, crackling, popping, nasty sounds. So here's a 12AX7 or a 9-pin 9-pin holder, and you can see they're just kind of split in half. And you just poke your guy in there. It's hard to look in the camera and do this at the same time. Let's see. You poke your guy in there and push it just a little bit to the center. Nice and gentle. You know, if you're, I don't know if you saw that. Let me get the next one here. Just a little bit and a little bit. And that's all you need to do to tension these preamp tube sockets. If they're too loose, if you can't clean them and they're dirty no matter what, and when you put the amplifier back together and it's still making that sound and hold, you know, nothing you can do to make it better, and you can really isolate it to this one socket. Just double check your solder joints, make sure there's no cold solder joints, maybe even just clean them and reflow them. And if that still doesn't work, you're probably going to have to replace the socket. Now, I very rarely replace sockets. So there are techs in there that instead of doing what I'm doing with cleaning them, they'll just replace them, which I disagree. The sockets that they make nowadays are not very, you're better off cleaning the old sockets. So, in my opinion, so plus replacing them is a lot of labor, to replace the sockets. So just clean them, do what I'm telling you. And then occasionally if you get one that's, I think this socket's been replaced because that one's black. That one was black. And this one looks like this one. So, you know, when you're talking about looking at amplifiers and seeing what's original and what's not original, that's a tall tale sign. One looks different than the other. So that one was black. Let's see what colors these are. Different manufacturers use different sockets, and you'll be able to, when you start servicing a bunch of amps, you'll be like, I've serviced 25 twin reverbs and I've never seen that color socket. That must be a replacement socket. Oh, see that was a real loose tube. Oh yeah, that's super loose. So I know it's hard to say, hard to see or feel, but there's like no effort in me pulling this out. Very little effort. And pushing it back in, it just kind of like falls into the socket. So I'll definitely have to tension all of these guys. So that one will need tensioned. And maybe that's why they replaced this socket. Not sure. But the rest of these black ones are really tight. That one's really loose. Let's see. All right. Let me give you a close-up shot of an octal socket and show you a couple different octal sockets. All right, so here's that octal socket again. It's a little bit different. The other one had a little nipple here that you could stick your pointer in, but this one doesn't. And you just work this guy in there and pull it together. Now, it is the occasion that the sockets are fragile. So when you go in there and poke it, you might break off a piece of the socket, which you want to avoid at all costs. But if that happens, there's nothing you can do about it. The socket's just failing and dry rotted and probably needs to be replaced. If it's just a little chip, you can get away with it. But if like this whole side chips off and it's close, then you're getting close to that metal being close to this metal, and it could cause an arc. So you definitely should just replace the socket. There's also a little trick. If you need to replace a socket, So say, or a pin, say one of these guys in the amplifier breaks off. Say you're soldering something on there, you put a new screen grid resistor on there, and this like chips off and breaks, and there's nothing to solder to. You can actually remove a pin and replace a pin. You don't want to do it on every single pin, but if it's just one, there's a little thing that keeps this pin from falling out. You just compress that and then push it through. Oops, push it through and take it out, and then obviously just put it back in. So that's what this pin looks like. There are different types of pins. To put it back in, you just push it in, bend it out, and then you might have to get your poker and poke that little guy out. Boom. And that's all there is to it. Also, to make these the pins a little bit more secure in the amp, you can bend them over like this, and that'll help these tube sockets be a little bit tighter. So that's another trick. You can also twist them, just depends on the socket. So that's a pretty common tube socket. And then let me show you one more socket. So here's another kind of socket. These are a little bit more challenging to tension. Let me pull one out so you can see what it looks like. So that's what it looks like, a fork. And the idea is that you want to pinch these two guys together. All right. You don't want to take all the pins out. That's not what I'm saying. I just took the pin out just to show you. So to tension it inside the thing, you can go in there and bend it like this.
Are those replaceable?
These pins?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can just do it just like I did. But again, if you just,
But is it something you can buy?
I don't think you can buy the pins. You'd have to buy a whole socket.
Okay.
You just get like a sacrificial socket. That's you could see the other one I had already taken a couple out,
Mm-hmm.
But again, you don't want to be replacing all the pins. Usually it's just like, oh shit, I broke that pin off, I need to replace it. If all the pins are loose, then you need to replace the whole socket. So this one doesn't have that little catch like that other one did. So you see now it's like kind of falling out. So you have to just make sure you bend it over like the other ones. Just get your pliers down. This is why you have to have a bunch of different types of pliers too, because one might work better than the other. There you go. All back together. Let's see. Different types of tube retainers. So here's another type of tube retainer. I do not like these kinds of tube retainers. I've only have these in stock for people that, really want to keep an amp original or something like that. So these go, they just get screwed on the bottom, and then you pull the top down and it puts pressure on the top. They're okay, except in my experience, if they're not done correctly, they can wear a hole in the side of the tube and actually crack the glass. So these metal pieces, if they're leaning on the glass, it could crack. Like it's leaning on the glass right there. You got to like bend it out like that, and then it's just pressing on the top. But even still, I've seen tubes crack around the top with these types of tube retainers. It's not like a huge deal. I'm not saying go check all your amps and replace all of them, but next time you pull your amp apart, maybe you want to make sure that these guys are moved out to the side. And also, if you have an amp like this and you're not gigging and you're not taking the thing anywhere, and it's not a combo amp, if it's just a head and these things are sitting on there, you can just take them off. You know, you can leave this part that'll be screwed to the chassis, and you can just pry this little spring off. It's just on there with like a nipple. So then you're just left with this that's on the amplifier, and you can throw this in your case or spare parts bin or whatever. Yeah, I don't love these. I'd rather have the bear trap ones. Bear trap ones can cause problems too, but you know, it's you need a tube retainer if it's a combo for sure, and you need a tube retainer too if you're traveling all the time. You don't want your tubes falling out a little bit or intermittently. You want them to be seated in that socket and stay in that socket. So there's that. Again, these are the bear traps. They're cheap. I think they're like $1.50. For 12AX7s, 12AX7s have, they typically come with a shield like this. And these just go together. There's a little nipple there, and then you twist it. That's one way to do it. And then there's, I like these kinds of tube retainers. Let me show you on this box. Find the parts bin. Uno momento. So I honestly like these pretty good. Can you see that? So it's just like a wire, and it hooks. It has a little hook on the tube socket, and then I'm going the wrong way. Sorry. And it just slides over top. They're nice, non-invasive. One thing you have to pay attention to and make sure of is that, here, let me take this off and show you. So the only thing about this particular tube retainer that makes me nervous is, you see how that wire, see how that wire is kind of close to like these pins. If that shorts out on one of those pins, it could short out the tube or blow a fuse depending on which pin it's on. Makes me a little bit nervous. So let me show you also on one of these sockets. One of these guys fell out. You can see. You should be able to see that it doesn't have a pin in it. But it's not a big deal because that's pin 1. And if you look at pin 1 of your tube chart on an EL84, pin 1 on an EL84, it's not connected to anything. So that not having a socket, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. You should be able to see that it's not even connected to any. Oh, sorry. Should be able to see that it's not even connected to anything, pin 1. But anyway, there are things to think about when you're cleaning the sockets, when you're looking at sockets, when you're diagnosing issues. When you're diagnosing issues and things like that. I don't know. I think we ran through a bunch of different things. Any questions?
I don't think I do. I think I ask my one, which was
Yes.
why were you doing that? Oh, go ahead, Andy.
So I've had a number of combos, and I've always found, like, especially in like the Blues Deluxes and Hot Rod Deluxes,
Mhm.
that I think it's like the grid plates start to rattle before the tube actually fails.
Right.
Like, see, you know, if you do a chugger, you get that rattle and a buzz, and as soon as you hold the tube a little bit, it all goes away. Is there any
Yeah.
ways of preventing that or helping that along in combos and things?
Not really. So the only thing you could do potentially is they sell these little like rubbers that you can put around tubes. They're called what they call, I think they're just called tube rings.
Yeah.
You can try doing that. EF86 tubes are notoriously noisy. They're very sensitive, and they can rattle around a lot. So if a new builder builds an amp with EF86, they usually use these big ass tube rings, and they'll put 2 of them on there. Or they actually, excuse me, I think they actually have a socket, a special tube retainer that goes over them to make them not noisy, because they're expensive tubes too. But other than that,
I find it happen mostly on my like 6L6 power tubes or something.
Say again.
They seem to happen mostly on like power tubes.
That rattle.
Yeah, that rattle. And so the amp still sounded fine, but they were just rattling.
Yeah, and actually, a lot of times you'll find that with like brand new tubes, they just like rattle, especially in combos. There's that's
just one of them.
Yeah, you have a better chance of buying a little bit more of expensive tube from like Tube Amp Doctor, and you have a better chance of getting one that won't do that, but it's not like a guarantee. You definitely can still get like a brand new tube from Tube Amp Doctor that rattles just the same as any other cheap tube.
And on that, with the whole life of tubes, do you tend to find that tubes do last longer in a head than they do in a combo?
Yeah. Yep. You know, not as a rule, but like, I mean, theoretically, and it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to test that theory, because it's not like there's a Hot Rod Deluxe. It's not like there's a Hot Rod Deluxe head and a Hot Rod Deluxe combo, and I can compare the tube life of them. But in general, like even just with my amps, I have a lot of heads, and I never replace tubes in my heads, like literally never. But my combos, I have replaced them at least once. Yeah, and also on this, as the in the spirit of tube life and when should you change your tubes, I like don't change my tubes on my amps. If something fails in my amp, in an amp that I have, and I put it on the bench and there's a bad tube, I replace it. But other than that, like I have a Sound City from the 70s that has the original Mollard EL34s in it. You know, just for perspective. And that thing's been played since like, it's not like it sat in a closet. It was in a studio, and it got used in the studio. And then I've had it for a few years now, 4 years now. And it's actually like my main amp. I play it as much. I mean, I don't gig, you know, so I'm not like playing it 3 or 4 times a day, but just I play it the most out of any of my amps, and I play it loud as shit. I keep that amp on like 9, and I, like I said, it has the original EL34 Mullards in it. And just for all you naysayers, I've replaced those EL34s with, you know, JJs and Electro Harmonics, and tongue souls, just to see what it sounded like, if it sounded any different. And it does not sound better with those other tubes. It doesn't sound bad. You know,
that's a good conversation to have too. The whole new old stock tubes, holy shit, they're expensive. So like, I bet to buy a pair of EL34 Mullards would probably run you about $400 or $500. They are not $400 or $500 better, in my opinion, than any other brand new set of tubes. I like them. I do think they sound better. It also could just be I want them to sound better, so I think they sound better. But I think I have a pretty good realistic approach to stuff like that, and I do think they sound better. But there's no way I'd go buy another set of $500 EL34s. Like,
There's
absolutely
not enough difference in it.
What's that?
There's not enough difference to warrant it.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
I don't laugh at people that buy new old stock tubes or anything. It's a whatever. People laugh at guys like me who have a bunch of amps that we don't use. We just like having the shit. So like, I get it. I get buying the old tubes because like you think it's cool and whatever. It's bragging rights. You can tell somebody, oh, I got an amp with black plate 6v6. I mean, I have collected. I think I have about 10 pairs of black plate RCA 6v6s. I like them. I think they sound great. I'm not going to pay a bunch of money for them, but I'll use them. And there's the occasion where I'll plug them into an amp, usually like one that I built or like something specific for a friend. And they really want to sound good. I'll try those black plate 6v6s and I'll try it against another type of tube to see if it makes a difference. And if it doesn't make a difference, I'll just put the cheap tubes in there. And sometimes one amp will sound better with the new old stock tubes, or sometimes they'll sound better with the brand new tubes. It can depend on the amp. I don't think I can back that up with any theory or logic. But it's good to experiment and just don't think because you spent a bunch of money on a tube, it's better than another one. And you can really experiment with that with preamp tubes, because preamp tubes are generally cheap. You can probably find some new old stock ones or just like pull them out of some old amp or whatever. With usually V1 is usually the first preamp tube in most amps. That is your main input tube. That's where like the signal first goes from your guitar. It goes into that tube. Try swapping that out with a bunch of different brands, like a JJ, a Tongue Soul, a Tube Amp Doctor, maybe like a Philips or an RCA, like just new old stock tubes. Just one at a time. Just plug it in. You don't have to turn the amp off or anything like that. Just keep experimenting with that one tube, and you'll be able to. I think you'll be able to hear the difference in most cases. And it might not be enough of a difference for you to be like, I'm going to pay the extra $5 for this tube. But I'll even with my JJs, like I'll try, if I have a very specific customer that's looking for a very specific sound, I'll pop out, like I'll have 5 different JJs, all the same type of tube, all 12AX7, but I'll keep popping out the JJs to see which one sounds better, because even across the same brand, you might get one that's a little better, a little worse, or different, maybe not better or worse. Maybe one will be a little bit brighter, one will be a little bit darker, things like that. But experimentation is the key. Yeah, I got a little stock of tubes. I put an order in before things like hit the fan, so I do have a little bit to get me through. We'll see. I have like I have a Music Man that's in that has 6 CA7s, and I don't have any 6 CA7s in stock because it's not one that I kind of keep a bunch of in stock because I just don't use them that often. So I had a Music Man the week before this guy brought it in, and that was my last quad of 6 CA7s. So then he brought this Music Man in, and my order got denied because C Distribution
has been pissing me off lately, and I think I'm switching tube. It's hard not to order from CE Distribution, which is amplified parts, but their tubes have kind of pissed me off lately. So I think I'm switching tube suppliers. I'm probably going to order from Tube Depot, or I heard Euro Tubes has a very good customer service for their tubes, and they're not in Europe. They're in like Kansas or something. I don't know. So I called them and they looked for some tubes, and then they called me back and said they couldn't find them. It was good customer service. CE Distribution, it's just like pain. I don't know. They've been pissing me off, so I might switch. Yeah. Any other questions? Amplified parts, Euro Tubes, Tube Depot. Tube Depot, I like the tubes that I get from them. They always seem to be really closely matched. And by matched, I mean the power tubes. When you're getting power tubes, they need to be matched if you're buying more than one. When power tubes go bad, you should replace them as a matched set. So if one power tube goes bad in a 100-watt amp that has 4 tubes, you need to buy a quad of tubes, and that means they'll be matched. Yeah.
Not a question so much as a comment, but I've got an old 4 amp there from the early 70s that I put a set of Ruby tubes in it for a few years, and then I got my amp tech to put the original Mallards back in when I realized my foolishness. So it's running what are probably the original Mallards from 1971 or 2 or whatever, and it sounds great. It's the amp I use every day. It's the one my customers come to demo stuff through.
Nice. Yeah, I like my old Mullards are good. I'm glad that you put them back in there. There was a time in the 90s where Aspen Pittman, who started Groove Tubes, it was like they were all of a sudden they were advertising to replace your tubes all the time. And I think people like got on that bandwagon and kind of, it's kind of stuck throughout the years. Yeah, I don't like Groove Tubes either. I'm not really a tube brand snob as far as like Chinese or Russian or Slovak or whatever. I'll put whatever you want me to put in your amp, but I'll significantly resist putting Groove Tubes in amps because I've had for every other tube that's gone bad, I've had 5 Groove Tubes go bad. They just always seem to be smoked. Mileage may vary. Don't listen to me just because I said it. It could just be a coincidence that I've had a bunch of Groove Tubes go bad. I don't think it is, but it could be.
The other anecdote I can add about you talking about the pins and making sure the valves are seat, especially on the road all the time. I had an orange amp, and I'd had it about a year, and it started making a horrible noise and faulty. And I was working in a music shop at the time. We were an Orange dealership, so I just rang them up, and they sent a courier, collected it, and phoned me and said it's on Aid Emsey's bench at the moment, and he's the guy who designed and developed most of their amps. And then they rang me back the next day, and they said, yeah, the amp's not faulty. Aid just pushed one of your power tubes back into place where it's supposed to be. And then they said it couriered it back to me again. So, yeah,
Nice.
If I'd listened to you back then, it could have saved us a lot of hassle and embarrassment.
Yeah, nah, it happens. Shit, it happens to me on my own amps. I just spent 2 hours searching for low power on this Vox AC30. I spent 2 hours searching because I couldn't get it to clip. Come to find out, I had my signal generator amplitude like 50%, so it wasn't clipping because I wasn't getting enough amplitude.
I just want to say quick, Luke.
Yes.
Tube Depot is a great supplier. I got tubes and stuff from them when I was out on tour, and I had no issues shipping to multiple locations. Their customer service was always great, and everything I got was always really good. So if that has anything for changing suppliers for you, it was a great choice for me when I was on the road and doing more amp work than I was normally needing. So
Oh, cool. Thanks, Todd. Yeah,
Yep.
I used to use them all the time before I was ordering like thousands of dollars worth of parts from C Distribution. I used to order from Tube Depot like exclusively. It's been a few years, but I switched to C Distribution out of ease because I was ordering all this other stuff from them, and I just put the tubes on them too. But I finally think I've had enough. But right now I can't buy them from anywhere. So if anybody's got a quad of 68.7s, let me know. I'm gonna wrap this up, and I know I'm not jumping on the online stuff very frequently anymore. I've just been crazy busy with all kinds of different things. If anybody wants to help me do my bathroom renovation, I'll trade you some tube amp work. But if anybody has any questions or needs help walking through stuff, hit me up on Instagram. I'll get back to you, and I'll leave you with one little simple tip. Oh shoot, where'd it go? Damn it.
I might find you on. What's your Instagram handle? Because I got a weird problem with an Ampeg.
He's Chesapeake.
Chesapeake Repair.
Oh, okay, I think I'm following you already, but I'll double check. Thanks.
Hold on. Nope, found it. All right. So occasionally you need to use silicone. I found that I've tried a bunch of different silicones. This stuff I have found to be the best. It's called Ultra Clear DAT. That's it. It's DAT brand. It's called Ultra Clear. But more so than anything else, my tip is I just put a nail in the top, and that helped keep a big long what is that, like an 8-penny nail, big long 8-penny nail, pushes all the silicone down and keeps it from drying out. And this tube has lasted me months because I put this little guy in there. And then also, so I'm not cussing you out one day when an amplifier comes in that you've fixed. You don't need a bunch of this stuff. You just need a little dab. You're just trying to keep something stuck to the amp. So if you're going to put something on there, you just need like that much. So when you put it on something, there's not like a huge glob of shit. Oh, I just moved it, so now it looks like a huge glob of shit. But you okay, you don't need to like squirt it on top and on the sides and all this other kinds of shit. Just a little dab will do you. Okay, and then use your 8-penny nail. I think that's 8-penny, maybe it's a 9-penny. Put it in there and your stuff will last forever. That's my tip.
Awesome.
Hope you enjoyed it. You guys need anything, hit me up.
Luke, thank you so much, man.
Yep.
Thanks.
Next session, I got to check with that other amp guy that's on here frequently.